Hi everyone, I'm Sushant, founder of SalesBlink, and with me here I have Frank today, who will be talking to us about all things email deliverability and how to get your emails land in inbox. Now, a bit about Frank and why he is the perfect person to tell you about email deliverability and ensuring that your emails land in inbox. So, Frank has over a decade of B2B sales experience and has led large sales teams, and currently he runs Salesforce and other forces where he helps customers deliver emails in the primary inbox. So, Frank, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, really good to be here. I typically chat about all things email durability, especially considering the fact that we just as a business across thousands of clients, we send millions of emails. So we typically see some of the things that are happening on a macro level, and as a result, naturally, we just help folks to improve their durability overall. And yeah, prior to kind of sort of running a sales tech company, I used to be in sales and for a bunch of different SaaS companies or tech companies. And naturally, email is always a topic, but email is evolving massively, especially over the last 2 years. And you could be sending sort of thousands of emails from your primary domain maybe a couple of years ago, but it's not really anymore the reality that we're in. And it's just going to get only tougher and tougher. And really the reason for that is macro level sort of trends. So for example, the fact that more and more emails are in circulation. So that means every single potential buyer essentially is getting a lot more emails on a daily basis than they used to a couple of years ago, because there's more startups, there's more automation, more emails, there's Gen AI stuff, right? But there's also a lot more sort of these what's called bad actors in the email ecosystem that you may not be aware, but essentially a lot of bad actors are sending, say, ransomware, essentially malicious content, right? Phishing attempts, all that stuff. And they're sending that to typically enterprise-grade companies are trying to penetrate those. And one of the easiest ways to penetrate an enterprise-grade company is to send a cold email with some sort of attachment or a link to an employee that's not really aware. And as a result, then the company gets penetrated. So as a result, right, we live in the ecosystem today where the ecosystem is pretty much dominated by Gmail and Outlook, the two main email service providers. And they see these trends, right? So, and they naturally need to do something about it, right? More emails or bad emails, right? And that just means more restrictions. So it's impacting really negatively the bad guys in the email ecosystem, but also at the same time, it's just impacting the good guys. Naturally, because the good guys don't really have sort of sophisticated sales teams or founders that understand email durability. They don't have typically email durability experts or engineering teams that get email durability. This is why there's sort of that typical conundrum where, a lot of softwares out there don't really focus on durability, but then some do, right? So we're one of those. But there's also a bunch of other ones, right? So out there that focus on durability and just getting tougher, right? And it's going to get even more tougher. So essentially, we're preparing for the new reality and also the future reality of what's to come. But ultimately, imagine at some point, maybe in the future, you may not be able to necessarily send emails at scale from Gmail out, and then what then, right? So that's the kind of the future that we're preparing for. And that's what we're building. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you for the information about deliverability. That is a very valid point, though, Frank. A lot of salespeople, when they are sending emails, they think what's wrong with sending a few attachments or a few images. But they don't realize that a lot of spammers and scammers are actually doing that. And so the whole idea of deliverability, to sum it up nicely, would be that you should not do something that an intentional scammer might be doing. So you don't have to do anything unintentionally that a scammer might be doing. And now it is very difficult for us to know because all these scammers also have new ways of improvising every other day. But yeah, Frank here will, I'm sure, share the best practices of how we can ensure the best deliverability and land in the primary inbox 100% of the time. Right?
Well, it's not about maybe necessarily to say 100% of the times, because that's like really unrealistic. It's all about maximizing the probability. How can you ensure that essentially you're as close to 100% as you can get? So it's never typically 100% of the time that you are always landing in the primary. There's multiple reasons why you don't. Like literally hundreds and hundreds of different reasons why you would not necessarily. But if you're landing most of the time, let's say 80, 90% in the primary mailbox of your recipient, then you're doing a really great job, and you're doing a job essentially that most companies don't do. So if you are in that sort of bucket where consistently you're landing in the primary, of course, you're going to see results, whether that's a sales pipeline or anything else that you're doing with cold email. But yeah, the problem just generally with cold email as a channel, it is right now essentially as complex or sophisticated essentially as Google Ads, right? Where you're bidding for different keywords and many other things. Just the difference between those two channels is that if you essentially fail miserably in Google Ads, it's gonna be costly for you. But if you fail miserably in cold email, it's not gonna be as costly because essentially sending cold emails is a much cheaper. Also from a cost per acquisition sort of standpoint, is much cheaper. You have a lot more control in cold emails because you're essentially competing right for the attention of the user in the inbox versus Google Ads where you're competing against other advertisers. Naturally, that massively increases sort of the bids and the CPC. So I used to work in Google myself and on the Google Ads team, so I have a good comparison there as well. And this is why I'm a big believer also in the email as a channel. Now it has its own problems, but that's exactly why it needs sort of, solving. And that's why we're here talking about.
Interesting. Awesome. So I have a few questions, Frank, for you.
Mhm.
So the first question for the people who might not be that familiar with why email deliverability is important. So if you can tell us a bit about why email deliverability is important for cold email outreach. Why not just start sending emails today?
So I literally spoke to a client earlier this morning about somewhat of a similar topic. So essentially the client's like, Frank, we're already using a tool. That tool allows us to send unlimited emails to a lot of people out there. So they're using some sort of a tool, and that tool essentially is designed for what's called transactional emails. It's not designed for cold emails. So essentially what you end up, first of all, typically if you look at the TNCs of, a lot of different tools, hey, that can send unlimited emails, you can see that cold emails, meaning unsolicited emails, is not something that's allowed. And you are essentially at risk of being suspended very fast, and it does happen. So ultimately, there are softwares that are designed for, let's say, newsletters like MailChimp. There are other softwares that are designed for transactional emails, for example, like SendGrid or Brevo. And then there's other softwares that are designed for cold email, right? So you need to choose the right software. And a lot of people believe that email is just the same. No, it's not. Because the way that the software is built in the back end and stuff like that is very different to accommodate. But ultimately, you can't just send a ton of email because ultimately, the email these days is an interaction between two domains or two essentially individuals, right? So if you're sending an email and that recipient doesn't like your email, they may report you for spam, or they may blacklist you, right? As an example. So ultimately what happens is if you're sending a lot of emails and you're getting a lot of spam reports, say from Gmail users, Gmail takes notice of that, right? And with that primary domain association of your business, you will then start landing a lot more in spam. So imagine a situation where you're just sending a bunch of emails and a lot of people reporting you. And then what will end up happening is all your emails, not all of them, but many of your emails start landing spam, whether that's a meeting invite to your existing customer or an email that you're sending to the investor. So ultimately, you can't be just sending anymore a ton of emails to your primary. So you are at risk of being spam reported with every cold email that you're sending out. So really, the only way to de-risk that, if you don't actually send emails from your primary ever, you're actually sending to what's called secondary domains. They also call the parallel domains and the burner domains, essentially permutations of your primary domain. For example, like try Salesforce, you get Salesforce, etc. Right? So there's permutations of that, and that's like super important that you have this sort of infrastructure these days. It wasn't a topic really, again, maybe a couple of years ago or so, but it's definitely a big topic these days. And it's important that you set that up. Essentially, think of it this way: that one single sales rep used to have just one mailbox back in the old days, and that user may have been sending sort of hundreds of emails per day. These days, one single user typically would have 10 mailboxes on average. So essentially, you're diluting the sending across more domains, more mailboxes. And because you're keeping the volume low per domain of emails that you're actually sending out on a daily basis, and as a result, the number of spam reports against these domains will be very low. So what you're doing then, on average, your email deliverability goes up. So this dilution concept is really the key concept, essentially called email, that's being leveraged by a lot of companies already today, but still majority of companies don't do that. And they just keep sending emails from the primary domain. Now, sending cold emails from your primary domain intrinsically is not bad if you're not getting spam reports, right? If there's engagement between business A and business B. But guess what? Most of the companies, 90% plus, do not have these sort of levels of engagement. The engagement levels that we're talking about is you should be getting about 20 to 30% reply rate between business A and business B. So if you're not in that range of, getting these sort of reply rates, and in cold email, typically reply rates are below 10%, then you will be sort of penalized. So really what the likes of Gmail and Outlook, etc., the whole email ecosystem is looking at is what's your engagement rate? What's the bounce rate like? This is like a hard signal. So if you're bouncing a lot, that means you're typically doing automation, right? So bouncing is not really good. And then the spam reports, of course, right? So are the users that are receiving emails, are they reporting you for spam? So this is really the kind of core stuff that Gmail is looking at. And then there's a lot of other bits. And then also the way that Gmail and Outlook operate are also different. So for example, Gmail operate a lot of their sort of proprietary anti-spam systems that are built in internally versus Outlook, for example, where Outlook uses a lot of third-party systems to dictate whether something will be landing in spam or not. So for example, they would look at blacklists a lot heavier versus say Gmail, right? So even how these two email service providers operate is like very different. But yeah, ultimately, to be successful these days, if there's one sort of macro view that I would love to maybe leave as the only maybe takeaway from this sort of talk is like, think of it this way, that there's like 4 pillars in cold email and being successful. So one's called infrastructure. So we talked about these sort of domains. The second one is actually using a software that specializes in deliverability. And a lot of softwares, especially the dinosaur ones, do not actually specialize in deliverability. So make sure you make the right pick on the softwares. Then the third one, which is a bit of a trickier one, a lot of people are not aware, but it's the copy. Essentially, the copy is like make or break when it comes to deliverability. It's like including links, whether you're actually tracking open rates even within the emails and stuff like that. Now, whether you're using templates or not. So essentially, using templates is bad for your deliverability. And they're bad, particularly in those cases when users report you for spam, because Gmail trains off that content. So meaning, let's say a lot of users report, let's say this particular domain as spam, and then they look at the content, and when they see that same content sort of circulating all over again, being static, so 90% of that being static, then you end up in spam folder, not because of your domain, the IP address, or something else, but really purely because of the copy. So there's only 2 ways to solve that. One is, before maybe the solution, just the way you have to think about copy in email, just generally going forward, is like you want to be delivering fresh copy, or rather unique copy, meaning that this copy is like unique for this particular individual. That means majority of the content in that email sort of changes somewhat. But to do that at scale, the only answer is unfortunately to programmatically assemble some of that content. The second answer, which is less effective, but it still has some sort of effectiveness in there, is the ability to use what's called syntax, so you're randomizing the content, and you won't be aggressively randomizing the content within the same email. So the example that we'll give you is essentially where you're saying the same thing, which is like, hey, hi, hello, right? So you're saying the same thing, but you're using different words. So at least for 50% of the initial emails content, you should be spending that. So this is sort of what I call pillar 3, the copy. And the final pillar, which makes or breaks when it comes to your success in cold emailing, is naturally the targeting. Who are you actually sending these emails to, right? Do you actually even have a product market fit to those individuals, right? So there are a lot of reasons why cold email may not work for somebody is because there's no PMF in place in the first place, right? That's where there's also a lot of reasons why people do fail in cold email, because cold email is fantastic and scaling is fantastic when you have PMF, and you just need to scale that up. But if you don't have the initial PMF in place, especially let's say you're a startup founder or a day zero founder, then there's a good likelihood that you may fail. And that's totally okay, because most of the businesses fail out there because they don't have product market fit in a lot of cases. It's not most. And so yeah, kind of summarizing again, 4 pillars: infrastructure, choosing the right sending software, looking after your copy, and then the list. If you look at these sort of 4 pillars, that's where you sort of invest your kind of attention, time, etc. So this is my typical piece of advice of how you can work towards really success. But you really need to pinpoint sometimes where is the problem if you are not successful. But yeah, as long as you have PMF, you should be seeing results in cold email.
Yeah, and that's a very good point, that if your product has a good fit with those type of leads that you are looking for and you're sending the emails to, your reply rate would be much higher. If you're just blasting off hundreds or thousands of emails every day and just expecting people to give you money for whatever reason, that just does not work. Another thing that I have seen a lot is that people expect that they'll just add a sign up link to their software, and then people would just come, check the email, sign up, use the product, and then end up buying. That's also something that doesn't really work, and it might even, because you're adding the link of your software, if you're a software business or service or whatever in the email, then that link might also be considered as a spam link in future cold emails that you plan to send.
Yeah, so maybe two things I can say about links just generally. One thing is if you're recycling the same link and then again, your copy may be reported as spam, that link may be blacklisted. So if a link is blacklisted, you are sometimes landing in spam because of the link itself that's in the copy. That's definitely a thing, and we have plenty of users that I know for whom this has happened. This in particular happens with what's called in the sensitive industries, like for example, B2B loans, for example, that people kind of send about, or any other industry really, right? So the more sensitive it is, the more spam rate, the higher the spam rates typically, the more problems you have, the more sophisticated you really need to be. And then other kind of practical kind of negative impact that you may have is, so you're including the link in the emails, and some of the companies use these sort of security sort of software as a bots essentially, and what they will do is they will access that link on the website, and then they'll do a lot of random activity on the site. And actually there are a lot of cases that are known where cold email takes your website down because of the amount of bots or that are accessing your site, are checking stuff, checking the sign up flow, like figuring out whether this is a legit site, whether this is not some sort of ransomware, right? So be careful of that. So I definitely know cases where there's literally traffic just spikes and it can take the websites down because of the cold email, because of that link. So this is just kind of two maybe things that do happen in the industry when you include links. Most of the time it doesn't happen, right? But this is, if you're doing, if you're not really, running at a much higher scale, but if you are, essentially the more scale you add, the more people messaging about kind of, the same problem that you solve, right? So the solution that you're offering, the more problems you'll start having. So this is essentially you're running at a much higher risk just ultimately.
So, as a rule of thumb, try to not add any links in your emails, in your cold emails, till there is, some kind of communication or interest has already been shown from your lead, right?
Yeah,
So
so
that's great.
I mean, if it comes to links, like what I recommend, or anything that's sort of HTML based, or links, stuff like that. So think of it like, overall strategy when it comes to engagement with your prospects. Like generally, like the strategy when it comes to engaging with other businesses should be like, how do I engage with my TAM in a way that I get the least number of spam reports, right? And it's very tricky, right? So how can I be nice when it comes to engaging with the person that I don't know, but so they don't report me as spam as much, right? So it's definitely challenging. So there's a few things that you want to take into account. So first of all, yes, in the first email, don't include like a bunch of links, like heavy HTML and many other things. Do what's called plain text email. So essentially send out an email without any HTML. And this is like the best form. So meaning no HTML, even in the signature. The signature has to be really plain text. And then once you land in the primary, right, you're in the primary, it's not like you're going to be automatically taken to the spam folder if you include a lot of links. So unless the user pushes you into the spam folder, right? So that's different. But really, when it comes to kind of sending HTML, videos, links, etc., you can start doing that in the second and the third email, the other couple of emails or the follow-up emails that I recommend doing. But generally speaking, in total, you should be having a maximum of 3 emails. Sometimes it's even 2 emails. If you have a big TAM and you're doing a lot of volume, you should be only sending 2 emails in total. And think of it this way, essentially 50% of total replies typically come after the first email that's being sent out. So the other, extra 100% of the replies, you will be typically getting that from email 2 and 3. And the reason for that is very simple. A person looks at your email, doesn't really sure whether, it's relevant for them or not. Essentially, they need more reasons to reply back to you. And this is why, when you're reaching out with a follow-up, don't just be like a nagging wife, like, hey, did you see my email? Don't do that. Provide essentially more reasons to the prospect to reply back to you. So whether you're including a case study or whatever it is that you're including, but give me more reasons to reply back to you, right? And this is what happens in the email 2 and then email 3. But essentially, the reason why you don't send more than 3 emails then beyond that really is because the probability of reply massively tanks after the third email, and the probability of receiving a spam report massively increases. So the second one is actually more important because, again, the more emails you send, so think to kind of to yourself, right? You're receiving an email from somebody you don't know, another one. At which point will you mark that recipient as spam? And typically, this is sort of, the borderline, there's about 2-3 emails. So it's much better to be engaging with 2 to 3 emails and then come back after a quarter. Meaning you're engaging with that particular individual once a quarter, only with a couple or 3 emails. And the reason why you're doing this is because one of the biggest problems just generally in sales, and in outbound sales in particular, naturally, is the timing. You cannot control when is this particular problem that you're looking to solve for your ICP is top of mind for them. So think of essentially emails as a bit like advertising, private network advertising, where you are reaching out, people open your emails, and it's like impressions essentially. People look at them, and if they didn't reply and if didn't opt out, come back after a quarter because the priority may have changed, right? So for that particular business. So think about kind of long-term pipeline building rather than trying to scoop up as many developers as possible within 7 days or something, right? And by doing so, you're actually generating more pipeline if you're actually strategizing that way. And that also ensures naturally much lower spam rates because you're not annoying the same user with like 10 emails, right, in the single sequence. So this is just much better kind of from, let's call it infrastructure hygiene sort of or maintenance standpoint.
For deliverability, that makes absolute sense. Like a lot of conventional wisdom says that keep following up till you get a no. But that is not a good idea in cold emails because then your chances of being marked as spammer increase by a lot.
Yeah, so this is why, you definitely, you can still be persistent, but that persistency rolls over to another channel of engagement, whether that's LinkedIn or you decide to do cold calling, right? So you definitely want to be adding more touch points in the equation, especially when you're high ticket sales, right? So that makes sense. But the answer is not more emails necessarily to that user. The answer is like, how can I get a response back from that user in a channel that they prefer the most? And sometimes it is the cold call. Sometimes people will give you like a 2 minutes on the cold call to discuss that particular thing. But on email, what they will not do, because imagine that particular prospect has like, I don't know, maybe they receive, let's say, 100 cold emails per day. Just think of that. And a lot of people in the US do, as an example. Or LinkedIn. Some people don't check their LinkedIn, so you're not going to catch it. So, there's multiple reasons. And some people are like social butterflies. They're always on LinkedIn. So there's also the other thing. So the best, way to catch that individual is on LinkedIn, right? So this is why, doing multi-channel, that's one. And then also doing what's called multi-threading. That's another thing you should be considering. So multi-threading ultimately means, okay, you send these 2 or 3 emails to that particular individual in the company, and then there's no response. What you want to be doing is you want to be then reaching out and sequentially to prospect 2, prospect 3 in the company. So you're doing multi-threading, right? And in a lot of cases, that's super important because sometimes, you're looking to solve a problem for that particular company. You have an assumption that's the right person to speak to, but it's actually not the case. It's somebody else, person named Katie or something, right? But you're not speaking to them, right? Because, companies have, different titles, etc. And this is also what I recommend typically also maybe in the third email to ask the prospect, hey, am I barking up the wrong tree? Should I be speaking to somebody else? And the person, just because you ask them about it, they are more inclined to, I don't know, ping that person in Slack or forward the email or CC that individual, right? So you want to be asking for it rather than expecting for prospects to actually CC somebody else, right? So think of it kind of that way. Kind of just be smarter about your outreach. It's definitely a lot more, as I said, a lot more sophisticated. It's like as complex as running Google Ads campaigns.
So, on this point itself, what do you think, Frank, are some of the misconceptions about, achieving high deliverability? Some things you see people doing wrong.
Doing wrong. I mean, there's 100 of different things that you could do wrong.
Like some of the common misconceptions as in something that they think will improve their deliverability, but it's more likely harming them.
Yeah, so probably the contested one is, it's pretty much as of recent. I'm probably going to say there's quite a lot of things you can discuss here, but ultimately what a lot of people love to look at when it comes to cold email campaigns is like, what's my open rate like? And people are like, oh, if the open rate is good, people are probably clicking it, they're looking at it, they go to my website, etc. But open rate is the same as impression data in Facebook ads. So yes, people did look at your ad, or they did look at your email, but did they actually go to the website? Did they actually click on it? Did they actually reply back? Was there a positive response, right? That's what really matters. Now, what the problems are with open rates is that when you look at an open rate within the campaign, it is always sort of flawed by default. It's not accurate. Open rates are not accurate whatsoever. You can read about it online. We also have an article on the site that talks about open rates and what are the kind of 20 different reasons why open rates are not accurate. So one example would be if you're sending an email to a Gmail user versus an Outlook user, the way that open rate tracking pixel will be triggered will be actually different. So think of it this way: if every email service provider triggers the open rate tracking pixel, which is essentially that invisible image in the body, differently, then it really depends on whether you're sending to 100% Gmail users, 100% Outlook users, and then you'll see kind of different rates. That's just one variable in play. Like, what are the ESPs, so the email service providers that you're sending the emails to? So this is, highly sort of contested in the space. A lot of people are used to looking at open rates, but the smartest cookies out there, they don't look at open rates anymore. They do look at the reply rate. So first problem is just generally the data isn't very accurate. But the second problem is the fact that you're including that open tracking pixel, it actually does slightly harm your deliverability, because a lot of companies out there, especially those that use email security softwares like Proofpoint, Bombcast, and a bunch of other ones, what naturally these softwares can do is they can check whether you're actually tracking emails or not. And in a lot of cases, emails that have some sort of tracking built into those are unwanted emails, whether this is a cold email, whether this is a real spam, or whether this is ransomware. A lot of all these people, they're all tracking the emails, right? And typically a lot of these emails are unwanted and they just disturb the employees of those, let's say, big companies. And what you can do, naturally, when you see that tracking built in, you can either decide to, okay, that automatically lands as spam because it has open tracking built in, or you can decide that the email will just bounce, right? So that's also something that can be done. So this is why typically, like, you shouldn't be really looking at open rates, but what really matters are people responding back to you. Because like I mentioned to you, the engagement rate between domain A and domain B is like super important. So that engagement is like, are we actually receiving replies back? Is there like communication going back and forth? That's like really important. Now, the other reason why this is also contested, why you should not be really tracking open rates, is if you look at Gmail's Help Center, you will see that they do not also endorse open rate tracking for very similar reasons I'm sort of describing. They say third-party tools don't really show accurate data, and there's other problems in this space, right? So what we are seeing in this industry is that we're moving more and more away from open rate tracking and really moving towards what really matters is the reply rates that you're getting from your prospects. And then as of recent, so a couple of weeks ago, so Gmail also announced a new thing in the email world, which is that if you are tracking, then let's say these open rates through this invisible image, so this open tracking pixel, then it can inform the recipient that the sender has this sort of invisible image, and that's really the open rate. And so there are two messages that pop in there. One is to show that image. So what happens when you click on that, the open rate tracking pixel just fires, right? And then the server and the sending software receives that ping saying that this user has opened the email. That's the only thing that happens. There's no actually image that kind of shows up, that invisible image. So that's the open tracking pixel. But then the second button, which is the crucial button really, is like it says, report this email spam. So like I said to you, like if users will start reporting a lot more those emails as spam because they're simply tracking open rates, then more of your emails will land in spam. So this is why generally the advice is not to track open rates anymore going forwards. That's really where the future is headed. Some people are building some different hacks towards this going forwards, but that still does not answer the fact that we should all be going after really what matters, which is the reply rate. Reply rate is really
Right.
what you're optimizing. And so that's like the first conversion sort of, right? So that you want to be getting to. But the conversion rate after is sort of what's called positive reply rate. Right? Do we get positive sentiment from the users like within the emails? And then after that, you're probably booking a meeting, stuff like that. So this is how you should be thinking about the general conversion funnel within email these days.
Right. So focus on what matters, and that is replies, because that's what's going to get you the sales that you are looking for.
No, it's also, sales, yes. But I mean, ultimately, any reply, even positive reply, even people swearing at you in the email, is good for your deliverability. Like, you want to figure out a way, how can you make people respond back to you? So even if you write back, say, hey, if you don't want me to reply back to you, just tell me stop or whatever, right? So the fact that the person replies back and says stop, it's just really good for the engagement, right? So just figure out ways, how can you make people just send you something back, and just good for your...
Yeah, and I think in that sense, it's pretty similar to something like Facebook ads, where if people even comment negatively to the ad, your ad still gets more relevancy.
Yes, because it's engagement, right? If there's engagement, that
Yeah,
means there's traction. That means if there's traction, that's good news. It's like, when you think about sort of advertising, there's no such a thing as bad advertising or bad PR, right? It's like, free marketing ultimately at the end of the day. That's kind of how you think about sort of cold emailing. So if somebody, replies back to you, swears that you says not of interest, just say yes. It's really good for you. Don't look at it negative way. I would say, just to improve to improve the positive reply rates, either you change the targeting, right? So you need to change the list. You may need to work on your copy because maybe people don't get how, what's the point of it. But I mean, if people reply back to you, typically people do get what's in the email. So like copy is not really the problem, right? If people reply back to you a lot of no's, you should be getting a lot of yeses, right? So if you have a product market fit, then you may not be targeting the right people. But again, like I said, there's also another problem in sales, which is the timing. So it's a no right now, but it's a yes in 6 months down the road, right? And this is why re-engaging with your prospects is super important. Like what I call recycling of the leads.
So moving on to the next question, how important is choosing the right ESP or email server for email deliverability, and which email service providers do you recommend for cold email as of today?
So essentially, it's still the mainstream answers being Gmail and Outlook as the two mainstream providers in the space. Now, the problems with those is that you will see more and more restrictions coming into play. It's quite expensive to run on Gmail Outlook accounts, and it just takes time to set up, right? So there's the downsides with the mainstream approaches, but they do work because they have the reputation within the IPs when you're sending out the emails. And then there are some what's called specialist providers in the space, where one of them, when it comes to cold emailing. So we're essentially replicating good infrastructure, but doing it not on Gmail and Outlook. So there's some providers also in the space. But ultimately, you don't want to be, I guess, there are some solutions in the space. So there's the two mainstream ones and there's the alternative one. But then there's also other solutions in the market which are not designed for cold email whatsoever. And it even states in the
So
clearing
I
list.
would sum it up as stay away from tools like MailChimp, Brevo, Mailgun, SendGrid. All of these tools, stay away from these. These are for marketing or transactional purposes.
Correct.
For cold email, you can go with Google or Outlook, but it's expensive. So Frank, what else do you recommend? Any tools? I think you also have a few of your services which can, I think, help as
Yeah.
an
So,
ESP.
I mean, anything that's really purpose built for outbound, like that's something you definitely want to consider. Not even maybe just to run just solely on that infrastructure, but think of it even from a sort of diversification strategy. Just like I mentioned that, hey, the fact that you're going to dilute your sending across more domains, more mailboxes, this improves your deliverability. But if you can actually dilute your sending across more ESPs, then that's part of sort of that de-risking. So that's another way how you can improve deliverability, because you are diluting across even more ESPs, even more registrars, domain registrars. By doing all of that, it just de-risks your sending. So yeah, we have a couple of infrastructures. One is what's called IntraForge, so that sets up domains and mailboxes on a dedicated IP. So it's dedicated IP sort of setup. That IP is only yours. The reputation is yours. You're banking on your own reputation. The upside is nobody else can impact your reputation a part of you. But the downside is if you're doing a bad job, so bad copy, bad targeting, a lot of spam reports, it will tank. But so there's always a plus, there's a good and the bad. But there's only two approaches in infrastructure. One is what's called dedicated, and then there's this second one, what's called shared IP approach. This is what Gmail and Outlook uses. So we also have another product called MailForge, and that's a shared IP. So meaning on a single IP, you've got multiple businesses, and they're all sending emails, not necessarily cold emails, just normal businesses that send emails, just like in Gmail and Outlook, where you are also being assigned a shared IP. And so you're amongst these other businesses, and then they may be sending normal emails or maybe some other emails, whatever, all sorts of emails. But then you're just sending cold emails, right? As an example. So it's a similar kind of concept we're replicating with MailForge, but essentially there's two approaches. So whether that's the dilution approach, or having more businesses on one IP, or just having a single provider or a single business on IP. Now, so typically, if you're getting a lot of spam reports, you want to be softening sort of the blow in a shared IP pool, right? So this is why Gmail Outlook works. So if you're getting a ton of spam reports, the other businesses and their reputation, you're sort of banking on theirs, right? So, but also the downside then of shared IP approach is like, if you're having some sort of what's called bad apples, right, on the shared IP, then there will be getting your deliverability down. So it's not necessarily something that happened to you because you did something bad, but actually somebody else did something bad, right, on that IP. And that's why then the average reputation then tanks. So this is why sometimes like people say, oh, my deliverability has tanked, and like have changed nothing. You changed nothing. Yeah, but the other businesses that were on the same IP, they maybe they changed something. So that's just to give an idea about the shared IP. So there's no like, this kind of sort of utopia approach where, one is this is like the prime way of doing things. Like generally speaking, there are these two concepts on how infrastructure is being sort of set up. And then you have to kind of figure out, okay, like, are you like a savvy user? Like, do you know what you're doing, etc.? You maybe want to be banking on your own reputation. But then, if you're like a big sender, right, you say, okay, I have millions and millions of potential companies I want to be reaching out, and I want to reach out to them out sort of programmatically and set up a lot of infrastructure. So again, like I said, just like you would sometimes maybe use Outlook and Gmail, right, to diversify the sending, you may also consider like these two infrastructures, again, to diversify the sending. Let's say in my case, in my account, I also have Gmail and Outlook accounts, but I also have some InfoForge and MailForge accounts because essentially I send across 4 different infrastructures. And that's because I'm a large volume sender, as example. Yeah, so in my particular case, I have about 700 mailboxes right now. And that's one single user, just to give you an idea, a real example. So yeah.
Yeah, really interesting. And once the ESP is selected, can you just explain to people who are not that familiar yet about why SPF, DKIM, DMARC, and all of these, technical setup records on the DNS are actually important? Because what I've seen is that a lot of salespeople, they find it too technical and don't want to deal with it. Right.
Yeah, so think of it like, your like travel passport, right? So when you're traveling from country A to country B, so this is the same, email travels from domain A to domain B, you have to pass the sort of, clearance or security checks, whatever, right? So, and there are all these, acronyms like DKIM, SPF, and etc., right? That essentially have to be filled out. And if you're wondering, is everything correct in my domain or not, you can just go to this tool called mxtoolbox.com. It's what's called the #1 tool in the space where you can check out essentially everything, essentially about your domain, whether you're on the blacklist or not, whether all your records are set up correctly. Just go there, enter your domain, and see for yourself whether everything's set up correctly or not. But yeah, so you want to be making sure that everything is sort of what's called green with your records, meaning that everything is filled out correctly. Because what happens is if they're not filled out correctly, then again, some of the businesses, not all, some of the businesses, when you're reaching out, they also would be checking your DNS settings, seeing whether everything's set up correctly. And if something is not set up correctly, then they may make a decision to do something else with your email, meaning not land in the mailbox of that recipient. Again, it may bounce, it may be sent to somewhere else, so quarantine, stuff like that, right? So it just really depends. But yeah, making sure that your DNS records are set in place correctly is like super important these days. So you can do that manually, naturally, through like a normal registrar like GoDaddy, etc., wherever you buy your domains. But yeah, let's say in our software, we just set it up literally within a couple of minutes, and everybody gets the same really sort of boilerplate in terms of how everything's done when it comes to DNS records. That everybody has the same settings in MailForge and InfoForge. But it's like super important, right? But there are a bunch of articles, like Help Center articles on how to set it up all correctly. So like, don't try it. You can just Google it, how to set up DNS correctly, let's say in GoDaddy or etc. You'll see a bunch of articles on there.
Frank, what are the best practices for sending frequency and volume for cold email?
So one thing I think I already mentioned, so like, 3 emails, right, in the sequence. Typically, I will sort of space it out across sort of roughly 2 weeks, all these 3 emails. So you're sending out the email on day 1, then you're sending up a second email, which is a follow-up email on day roughly 3, I would recommend. And then the third email is typically after 7 days, roughly.
And how many emails can we send in a day?
So,
Typically?
typically I say as many as you wish if you have the infrastructure in place. But most people don't. So really, per mailbox, you should be sending out a max of 30 cold emails per mailbox per day. And then that's really like the max. Some people do 25 already these days and like 20. Just keep on reducing volume. The more volume, essentially every cold email you're sending out is at risk of being spam reported, right? So like 30 is like really the limit. But people that keep on reducing, let's say 25 cold emails per day or like 20 cold emails per day per mailbox, you're just reducing the risk. of your infrastructure sort of burning, right? So you're reducing the potential burn, right? So, and each domain should be having about 2 or 3 mailboxes. So as an example, if you get 10 mailboxes, then that's 5 domains typically, and then you can be sending about 300 cold emails per day. And the domains that you should be getting that we typically recommend are the .com domains. That's the top level domains you should be getting. The reason why .com and why you should not even consider any other one is because most of the internet was built back in the days naturally on .com domains. And so when a user sees a .com domain, they have the best familiarity with that extension, right? Domain extension. Hence, the probability, this is just talking psychologically, the probability of a user reporting you for spam is just the lowest because of what users are just used to seeing on the internet. Once you start buying, like domains that XYZ or some other, top level domains, they just have a much higher probability of being reported for spam. But technically speaking, there's no difference, technically speaking. But from a user standpoint, the user's probability of reporting you for spam, of course, that's where the difference lies. And it kind of makes sense, right? Why .com domains will just last longer, purely because they will receive just fewer spam reports. So yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to see it, because a lot of people would actually usually buy these burner domains as .xyz or something else just because they are much cheaper. But makes much more sense to buy a .com as people might know about it already. And as technical people, we always tend towards, we know that there's no difference at the back end. So we tend to, just go for the cheaper alternative. But that absolutely makes sense if you're sending cold emails to founder of, let's say, some laundry, or, owner of some coffee shop. They are most likely not familiar with .xyz or even .ai for that matter.
Yeah, kind of think to yourself,
Nice.
you receive an email from an unknown sender. Typically, you do this sort of scan of the email. So, like, is something suspicious about this email? And the first thing is you look at the
Yeah.
domain. It looks like a fishy domain. So you're like, nah, I'm not gonna respond, right? So you have to look like a legit sender. And the fact that you're already using a secondary domain, it's already not the primary domain, right? So already that is a cause for suspicion. And again, if you're then using a different top-level domain, and then even if you check out the website and it redirects to other one, so let's say you're using a secondary .xyz domain, but it redirects in our case to .ai or .com, right? Again, that causes suspicion just generally. So you want to be also maybe in some case, not all cases, but in some case you want to be using the same extension. So I know some companies that we're working with, they have .app. So the domain extensions they're buying right now are .app, so that when it redirects, it's still .app, right? But ultimately, whatever you decide doing in the end, just think from a user standpoint when they look at that, and when domains may redirect and browse and many other things, like would it cause you a suspicion? Everybody's biased, so just show it to your mom or to your wife or something, right? Say, hey, honey, like I'm gonna send you this email. Let me know if something looks fishy, right? So you can just ask some random people as well. And how would they perceive sort of those emails, and whether they're more sort of prone to reporting that domain as spam versus another one, stuff like that. So just don't be shy to ask some sort of random people, whether that's your grandma or otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. So once all of this is said, so are there some tools, Frank, that you recommend for, measuring the email deliverability?
Yeah, so you want to be running these sort of spam tests for sure. So if you want to run some spam tests, just go to MailReach, for example. There's a company. There's other companies that do spam tests as well. Spam test means you send an email to just random domains, and then you get a report whether your emails have landed in the spam or not across different ESPs, whether that's AOL, Gmail, etc. And really, what matters is if you're on B2B, you want to make sure you're only checking Gmail Workspace and Office 365, right? You're not checking the private accounts, because ultimately, typically you should not be sending to private accounts, so meaning at gmail.com or at outlook.com. I highly advise against that. Gmail and Outlook, they're very protective of their domain. That means those are super, super sensitive. Like getting a few spam inputs there, that's it, you're done. So more or less, that's how you can look at that. Whereas the custom domains are less sensitive just generally. So highly advise just to try and send always to business domains rather than the personal ones. So yeah, MailReach will be one of them, but essentially just Google spam test, and you'll see a lot of solutions out there. And then one thing you want to be maybe testing is what's called the spam checker. So it essentially checks your copy. So especially if you're sending email for the first time and you're crafting an email, you're like, oh, this is amazing copy, but you're using some sort of, what's called some words which just trigger spam alerts essentially. And you want to be essentially checking your copy through some random tool on the internet. And there's one called Mail Meteor, for example, spam checker. Just can you Google that one, but there's also other ones. So you can just plug in your copy, it checks the words, and it will tell you whether there's some issues with those words or not, and then you may want to adjust your copy. But essentially, leveraging a spam checker is like super important. And yeah, I mean, and then if you're using some sort of sending software that doesn't support syntax yet, and there are some tools that do not support syntax yet, which means that the word randomization, you can also search for that syntax or generator, whatever. You'll also see some tools there that'll help you sort of to randomize the copy. So, things like that, super important. So these are a bunch of free tools. Yeah, nothing else comes to mind that would actually make a difference, like really. There's a lot of free tools, but like from a deliverability standpoint, not much. It didn't make a difference. Just to get an idea. There's a lot of stuff on the web which is like nice to have, but makes kind of no real impact on your results.
So, Frank, how do you see the landscape of cold email changing through the next few years? Is this a skill that people who are, let's say, in sales or marketing should develop today? So, how do you see it growing basically in the next, let's say, 5 years?
So, probably look at it from a sort of macro level standpoint. So you have a business or you are in a business, and your goal is to acquire customers. Now, there are some what's called mainstream channels of how you typically acquire customers. You could go to Google Ads, you could do SEO, you could you could do cold calling, you could do some stuff on LinkedIn, blah blah blah. All right, so there's these mainstream options, and you essentially pick your poison. And the reason why I say that cold email is the best poison to pick from all the other channels is because it has, if you're actually being systematic and you're following best practices in the industry for cold emailing, you can predictably scale and predictably see results at a very low, what's called CPA, cost per acquisition, right? That means you're reaching, especially if you have a large TAM, you're reaching out a large TAM, you can identify these individuals really well from kind of list building standpoint. You're building copy, etc. You should be investing in cold email. However, cold email is bad for guys like Google, right? The more cold email you send, the less money they make in advertising. So yes, it will become a lot tougher. So the way the cold email will look in about 5 years will be very different from this particular moment. So you have to kind of brace yourself. Especially what we're bracing for as our business, and this is what we are also discussing with other tech companies and sales, is like, imagine a world essentially where just Gmail and Outlook is not anymore an option sending cold emails programmatically, right? So what else do you do then? So one is definitely the kind of what we call the infrastructure landscape will change there, is our bet. On the copy front, we're definitely going to see a lot of AI stuff, of course, and there's a lot of tools in that space, whether that's clay.com or really a lot of tools that, help you to craft these great emails without improve your, conversion rates. But think of it this way, that not most of the emails, but essentially we will see the reduction in templates being used across the email ecosystem, and a lot more emails will be what we call programmatic. They'll be programmatically assembled by either scraping the web, or meaning LinkedIn, websites, many other things, and then using that sort of input data from the buyer to then craft really great emails. So we're going to see more of that. This is why we typically say there will be a dearth of templates. Also because templates are also negatively impacting deliverability, so you kind of also have to think from that standpoint. So you need like fresh copy is like a big challenge right now, and that's one of the trends we're going to see in this space. We're not going to see, I think, a lot change on the leads perspective. I don't think there's much there. What we're definitely going to see is a lot of disruption in infrastructure. We're going to see in the copy front a lot of disruption. And we're also going to see probably on the sending front some changes as well, meaning how do actually all these software that send emails, how do you need to send emails in the future so it's more sort of future-proof versus the restrictions that are going to be coming from Gmail and Outlook, because there's definitely going to be more restrictions. So you have to also kind of, the software has to evolve with all these, let's call it, new regulations. The potentially, new legislations may be coming out, right? It's not just the restrictions that Gmail and Outlook are putting on you, but imagine if some countries like in the US, etc., will start putting some regulations out on this. So just to give you an idea, in the US, cold calling is AI cold calling, meaning using AI agents and doing cold calling is actually prohibited by law. So imagine if some sort of legislation comes along. Of course, then nobody will be able to do that. But there may be some changes definitely that's coming in the cold email space. But I don't think it will ever die. It's just morph, right? People used to send cold emails, many decades ago. They still send emails today. The reason why our business exists, somebody sent me a cold email as an example. Just to give you an idea. Cold email definitely leads to greatness. Something changes in your life, in your business, whatever. So that will never die because, ultimately business A that doesn't know business B still wants to reach out, right? So this is always a cold email. But even Google sends cold emails. Their sales team send me cold email, right? So, and they send other people. Everybody sends cold emails, right? It's just that it will definitely morph over time. And I think also the reason why it will morph, just because it's much easier to send great emails out there because of all the AI stuff in the space, right? So because it's much easier to send greater emails, people will start sending more emails. And again, that's just one of the other things that will happen in the space, and then there will be a reaction by the, the buyers essentially, how they'll react to these. If all emails are great, what do you do then? If all emails are great, all emails are personalized, all emails are relevant, right? So instead of seeing 100 templates per day in your mailbox, you're going to see 100 highly personalized emails. But it doesn't mean that they'll be responding to all those emails, because at the end of the day, time is money, right? So they have limited time in the day, and it's not like they can even respond to all these emails. So we're also going to see, I think, shift on the buyer side where the buyers essentially, they will be processing emails, again, leveraging AI. They'll be processing emails, and then they'll be only looking at emails that are really fit within the business, meaning they're looking for a particular vendor that may be solving particular problems, right? So we're going to see that shift. So I think there's a lot more tech to come on the buyer's side. But ultimately, we're going to a world in about 5-10 years where AI agent speaks to another AI agent, and there's a transaction that happens at the end. That's still really where we're headed, I think, as the world today.
Really interesting. So, Frank, thank you very much for joining us. All of the things you have shared about email deliverability, I'm sure anyone who will go along with all of these things will surely get a better email deliverability than what they were getting before. So, with that, let's wind it up.
Yeah. Thanks for your time, Sushant. And
Thank you,
any
Frank.
questions, ping me on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. So in case anyone has any questions, you can find Frank's, LinkedIn down in the description. Thank you, Frank. Have a good one.